Right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's webinar. Tonight, we've got Sam Boone from Signet Breeding Services. Sam has been part of the AHDB team for over 25 years, and I worked closely with Sam when I was at AHDB. He works as part of the beef and sheep genetics team, and Signet supports the delivery of the AHDB's national genetic evaluations, providing breeding values to over 30 different breeds of sheep. Sam helps to run the national progeny test and RamCompare, and supports the national progeny test called RamCompare, and supports the Welsh Sheep Genetics Project in Wales, which has developed genomic breeding values for hill sheep. Sam has recently helped with the development of an environmental breeding index that enables us to rank animals according to their genetic potential to reduce carbon footprint. So that's exciting stuff for the future. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Sam to tell you all about RamCompare. If anyone's got questions as we go through, just use the raise your hand function and then or type it in the chat, and I'll bring it in as we go through this evening. But so without further ado, Sam, don't forget you need to unmute yourself because I've muted everybody. I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Sam.
Lovely. Thank you, Katie. Really nice to be with you this evening. As I say, I worked with Katie for many years. In fact, on good old Facebook, the most successful thing I ever posted on there was a picture of Katie Thorley catching a chicken at an NSA event. So really nice to have a catch up. Let's do a proper share screen. There we go. It's amateur hour at this end. Lovely. Does that look okay, Katie?
Yeah,
Thumbs
that's
up and
fab.
all that.
That's fab.
Perfect. Lovely. So just going to talk a little bit about AHDB's investment in genetics, a little bit about RamCompare, that's the main thing. And then I'd forgotten, I'd put a bit in here about genomics and breeding for the environment. Katie has a bit of a teaser as well. So there we go. So don't really need to tell any of you the importance of genetics. We use it in all other livestock species. It's a great way to make a cumulative, permanent and a cost-effective change to a population. And for the last 20 years, we've been chatting to people about focusing on their economic breeding goals, but genetics is also a wonderful tool when we think about environmental breeding goals, about producing lamb with a low carbon footprint. So genetics is really high on AHDB's agenda. As I say, I work for Signet, but I'm part of AHDB. I just have the beauty of being able to go across the boundaries into Scotland, and I'm off to Aberystwyth tomorrow. So as part of the Welsh Sheep Genetics Programme. So yeah. Within Signet, we deliver 3 multi-breed evaluations. One for terminal sires, which is genomic for Suffolk, Charolais and Hamps. One for what I call the lowland maternal breeds, so the Clin, the Romney, blue-faced Leicesters, but also the wool shedders. Wool shedders probably 30 or 40% of the sheep now within that breeding programme. That's a fast expanding area. And then the hill sheep evaluation, and that's very much dominated by the Welsh breeds because of the ongoing programme of activity in Wales. And again, that's gone genomic as well. So 3 big evaluations, and RamCompare has a really important role in underpinning our mixed breed terminal sire evaluation. Give you a bit of a flavour for sort of records coming through. Although there's 6 or 7 million records within the overall analysis, at the moment we sort of pick up about 100,000 additional sheep records each year. If we looked at last year, you'd see that actually the most records we get through are for Suffolk's, but that's partly because for Suffolk, Charolais and Hamps, we've got a data sharing agreement. So we pick up all of the sheep in the registered flock book. Sadly, not all Suffolk, Charolais and Hamps are performance recorded. It's only a small subset of those, but lots of Clin, lots of Welsh Mountain and lots of wool shedding composites. So there we go. 42 different breeds in total. So Katie said, just chat to us a little bit about RamCompare. So RamCompare is the national progeny test for terminal sires. We've probably involved over 15 farms over the 9 years, and we've got a couple of our new farms on the call tonight, which is nice. We've collected data from about 50,000 lambs that have been that we've got slaughter data for, and that's by over 500 different sires. So it's really quite a large data set, and we can use it for lots of other purposes within our research work, as well as using it within the terminal sire evaluation. So from that, we've developed breeding values for carcass weight, conformation, fat class, and days to slaughter. Done a little bit of work on shear force as well. And RamCompare is wider than just AHDB. We've had funding from QMS in the past, HCC, and we're well supported by partners in industry that help with data collection in particular. That's me looking not a day over 40 something, but actually the real work is done by Bridget. Bridget's based across in France, but she's the project manager for this. We've got the team out on the farm. Laura and Stuart have helped with the collection of the ultrasound scanning data, and we've had a lot of help from Fiona Lovett as well on the health side of things. She's kept me out of trouble and occasionally caused me a few sleepless nights, as we've had rams in quarantine that have caused us a bit of head scratching. So very lucky to have this team supporting us for RamCompare, and that's not to mention all the many farmers that spend hours helping us to collect the data. So the project in a nutshell is that we find a willing farmer. Here's Adrian down in Cornwall. We want a relatively uniform flock of ewes. We've tended to go for forage-based systems, and then we give them a whole different group of rams. So rams of known genetic merit, recorded animals. We single sire mate. We use semen as well, and then we can track back the details of those lambs to mum and dad, and that's the data that enters into our analysis. It isn't Tinder for sheep, and that was probably one of my more excruciating hours, being interviewed by Radio Scotland by a lady explaining it wasn't Tinder for sheep, as she tried to sensationalize it. But nice to see that we managed to get in the sun. My parents were very proud, as you can imagine. So this is the data collection. Rams come in and we have a really strict quarantine, and every year we have something new that catches us out that we're surprised by. And that's despite the fact that we're buying largely about 98% from MV accredited flocks, and flocks that I would regard as relatively high health, and yet we have surprises, be it CLA positives coming through, sheep scab penside test results that aren't quite what we expect, and various other inconclusives. And that just tells you a little bit about the challenges when it comes to ram buying. I don't think Signet clients are any worse. I think they're probably better than many in the industry, and hence the importance of quarantine. Lambing time, we're starting to collect data, including the information that goes into lamb survival. Then lambs would be weighed at 8 weeks of age by the farms, and then we'll head out into farm just about the point of first draw, and we'll do the ultrasound scanning. That's all the information that would be collected on a normal Signet recorded farm, but we have the addition of collecting the slaughter data. So lambs are drawn when they're ready, and that information then filters back through to Signet to produce a series of estimated breeding values, and ultimately can also be used to influence the breeding indexes that we have in the background. The great thing about setting this pathway up for RamCompare and for the various sires that we progeny test is it also has enabled other breeds to supply data. So probably the best example would be the Pole Dorset guys. They slaughter quite a lot of wether lambs and males that they don't need for breeding, and we take that abattoir data, include that in the analysis, and that's effectively a free phenotype, a free measurement that we can analyze. So why are we doing all this? Maybe this should be the first slide. For many years, we've had proxy traits that are measured in our ram breeding farms. We've had scan weight, we've had muscle and fat depth assessed using the ultrasound scanner. and then used to reduce the breeding index. But these are proxy traits, because the things that you actually get paid on are carcass weight, conformation, fat class, and your profitability is influenced by days to slaughter. So this was a project about confirming the benefits of the proxy traits and the value of those, and maybe tweaking the relationships where needed. It was an ability to demonstrate the benefits of selecting on the proxy traits, and now it's actually moved on and shown the value in this data in its own right within our evaluations. So we're in an interesting situation and a bit of a crossroads, because CT scanning tells us a tremendous amount about the yield of meat in carcasses. However, it's really expensive, and the SRUC business model for CT scanning has changed in the last 18 months or so, and that really is starting to make these measurements verging on cost prohibitive. We've got the information collected on farm, and now we've also got the abattoir data. So what we've been able to do is to fit genetic correlations between the existing traits and the new ones. So the strong relationship would be between scan weight and days to slaughter, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but there are also clear relationships between muscle depth and conformation, fat depth and fat class, as you would imagine. And if you go onto the Cygnet website today and pull up any Suffolk, Hampshire, Charolais ram, you will find breeding values for it. Even if it's not Cygnet recorded, you will find breeding values based on the animal's pedigree and also any genotypes that have been collected. And so you can see here the breeding values for the on-farm traits, CT traits, and now you've got the abattoir traits at the bottom. So we've got more informative information to help our selection decisions. And I realized that it's a bit of a challenge. When I started, we only had 7 traits. And when I went to speak to a village hall, everybody said, oh, but you don't measure this and you don't measure that. Now we've got 50 traits, and folks say quite rightly, that's a lot of information. I can't take all of that on board. It needs to be simpler. It needs to be clearer when it comes to our RAM selection decisions. And there's things that we can probably do to actually help in that respect. Nice little couple of examples. As Katie knows, I do love a good graph. So here we've got the breeding values for scan weight for the lambs that Duncan Nellis up in Northumberland has reared for us over a 5 or 6 year period. Here's the days to slaughter EBV, and you can see a really clear relationship between the two. If you increase the scan weight and the live weight on farm, they will be leaving that farm earlier. And when we actually had a look at the data, we looked at a cohort of about 4,000 lambs. We divided the rams very simply into this, because he'd used 50 over that period. So the top 10 versus the bottom 10. And you can see a difference there of 10 days in terms of days to slaughter, which might not sound much, but these are animals that are finishing on an organic, clean sort of clover and forage break, growing extremely fast, exercising all their potential. And even with those fast growth rates, there's still plenty of difference that we can attribute back to the sires we've used and their genetic merit. So nice example of the value of selecting for growth to reduce days to slaughter. Across with Reese, this is from a couple of years ago, but again, we plotted the genetic merit of the sires for carcass weight and scan weight. Here we've got carcass weight versus the carcass weights of the progeny, scan weight versus days to slaughter. Again, really clear relationships dropping out. And Reese was saying, even back in those days when lambs were a little cheaper than, or not as dear as they are today, you're talking about differentials of £5-6 a lamb, just within the range of sires that we supplied through to him. So some important financial differences. I showed lots of different breeding values earlier, and that's fine if you're a ram breeder and you need that level of detail, but this is the card that you'll commonly see if you're heading to a sale. Anything this side of the line tending to be a superior attribute. So if we're looking for a terminal sire, this is a ram that will give you more growth, give you a lot more conformation as a trait leader for conformation. And this one will tend to be a bit leaner or give you lambs that can be taken to heavier weights. So the information is relatively simply displayed, and it's all at the click of a button. You could have put in this ram's details onto your phone, pulled up the Signet website, and you would have found that information. And indeed, if you've got rams at home, it may be worth just dropping their UK ministry number into the website and having a look. So there we go. That's the sort of wider version of that data. If you're actually looking for rams, there's quite a nice little flock finder. So you can put in your postcode, you can put in the breed of interest, and you can see who's got sheep that are performance recorded close to you. Small child's just had the indignity of slamming the door of my office so that he can hear himself playing Rocket League with his friends. Clearly, we have our priorities right in this family. When we're talking about ram selection, Fiona would also say, don't forget about flock health. That's a really important point to actually come in with that conversation. So that's a little bit about RamCompare and the progeny test, the data that we collect, the value that it has, and the way that we've actually used it to underpin our evaluations. The big exciting development in the last 18 months is the fact that we've gone genomic with our breeding values for our terminal sire breeds. So these are breeds that are already using genomics to do sire verification to make sure that dad is exactly who he says he is, and genotyping some of the ewes used in embryo transfer work as well. So they've got this information. And they were saying, well, how can we actually make more value out of it? Well, you can make more value out of it by building it into the genetic evaluation for your breed. So the way we use the data is the same process that we've used over the last 20 years. Collecting pedigree, collecting performance, using a statistical package called BLUP to tease out all of the non-genetic influences on performance, so age, rear type, sex, and what you're left with is a series of breeding values for that animal, and then that can be pulled into an overall index. But in a genomic age, we can also genotype that animal. We can have a look along the DNA strand, and we can find variation at a number of places within that DNA strand. If we find all the animals with really high muscle depth also share the same genetic pattern of variation at the same point on the same chromosome, then it's quite logical to deduce from that actually that genetic variation on the chromosome is influencing the muscle depth, the expression of muscle depth in that animal, and hence it helps to cement the breeding values and increase the accuracy that we have for that trait. The really interesting thing is, based on that information, if you were to genotype a related animal, then you can actually look at the DNA sequence for that animal, and if it had the same variation at the same point, you could then deduce that that animal also has good genes for muscling. So a really useful technology for increasing accuracy. Where do we use it? Well, first of all, we use it for verifying parentage. Now, none of my clients ever make any mistakes when it comes to parentage, but dog walkers seem to very frequently leave gates open for which they're blamed when I have to ring up and have that difficult conversation to say, well, actually, the sire of this particular animal isn't who you told us that it was. So we're able to verify parentage. We're able to often use sire discovery to work out who it really was. And having an accurate pedigree is really important in what we do. We can also report back major genes, and the sheep industry actually were at the forefront of this because of the work on scrapie genotyping. So they already recognize the value of major genes. And other examples would be genes influencing myostatin, some major fertility genes that are out there, as well as some nasty recessives and traits that you wouldn't want in your breeding program. You've got the microophthalmia that has been picked up in a very small number of Texel, and they've actually used genomics to identify the carriers and to make sure that's bred out of the population. The reason I'm interested in it is for the two in the middle, really. It's a way of lifting accuracy values, and it's particularly useful for young animals. So in the dairy industry, we use it for selecting young Holstein bull calves, and we can do that with the accuracy of a bull that's been at stud and actually got daughters within the milking herd. So it gives us a really good starting point for a trait that wouldn't be expressed for many years and has to be expressed by an animal's female relatives. But it'll also be good for things that are expensive. So if you're doing work on shear force, for example, and good for traits. Yeah, so other examples, I guess, would be if you're measuring methane, would be another one of those hard to measure traits. So really useful in our breeding programs. And in addition to that, the added advantage for the sheep industry is a better way to compare performance between flocks. Many of you will know that this sort of Achilles heel in sheep breeding programs is the lack of the use of AI between different flocks, the lack of a sort of solid group of reference rams. But using DNA, we can actually make some comparisons because we can look at genomic similarities between flocks where you might not find that on the pedigree, and that's been really useful. Sort of the last little topic is the work we're doing breeding for the environment. So for many years we've talked about economic breeding goals. We're now talking about environmental breeding goals, but actually the two are relatively closely aligned. In our genetic improvement programs, there's lots of the things that we already do that have already been used to reduce the carbon footprint of lamb production. So ensuring that ewe successfully rears 2 lambs, that she does it every year for a number of seasons, that the meat that's produced has plenty of meat on that carcass, muscle rather than fat, that we're selecting for parasite resistance within the breeding ewe flock. That's something I've not talked about much tonight, but we're doing work where we use fecal egg count and also IgA in the blood as indicators of worm resistance in our breeding programs, and also the ability to reduce adult ewe size if we wish to. The challenge in selecting for ever increasing growth rates is that the ewes tend to get bigger and bigger, but we're not just interested in output, we're also interested in efficiency. So if you've got a ewe flock that runs through the winter and weighs maybe 5 kilos less as a result, then there's a potential saving there in feed efficiency and also methane production. So those are the things that we've done for many years. But we can also now have some direct measures. So direct measures of methane using the portable atmosphere chambers is another way of getting a good handle on levels of methane that are produced by sheep and can be built into our breeding programs should we wish. And that's why we are involved with the Breed for Change program. Cigna AHDB are part of that. This is a project that's brought together a number of industry partners. They're interested in the ability to identify those sheep with a naturally low carbon footprint. I think it has interest partly at government level. Government is setting every industry targets with regard to environmental targets reducing carbon impact, and the sheep industry is no different. So I think it's useful there. I would rather, if they wanted to reduce methane emissions, rather than saying have 10% less sheep, simply find the sheep that produce 10% less methane. And also a number of supply chains are really interested in this area. We certainly see programs where in the beef and the dairy sector, folk are rewarded for using low carbon footprint sires. So the project is looking at the things that we measure on farm but it's also looking at the use of the portable atmospheric chamber to measure methane, pulling all that data together so that we've got a very simple way of ranking animals according to their genetics. And it's a win-win, because all of those things that I talked about are about improving flock efficiency, and generally, if you improve flock efficiency, you improve profitability at the same time. So there we go. So sort of fairly quick summary tonight. Many farms currently underutilize the big genetic differences that exist out there between animals, and RamCompare is quite a nice example that actually shows us that. AHDB's investment in genetics is developing and has developed tools that are more informative and more accurate for ram buyers. And the good news is that the more profitable sheep also tend to be those with a lower carbon footprint. So there we go, Katie. I will stop sharing. We'll see if anyone's still here. And that was your 30-minute snippet on some of the things we're doing at RamCompare.
Fab, thanks, Sam. Hopefully you guys will have some questions, but I've got one. Just, have you seen there be an increase in buyers looking for figures when they're actually buying either rams or ewes?
It varies. It varies massively within breed. And I think people are buying direct from farms a lot more, where they're interested in genetics. And it's not just ourselves, because Innovis also have breeding values for recorded rams. And we have, I'm thinking of quite a few that are selling strongly off farms, the likes of Neil McGowan up in Scotland, John Scott. That there's a lot of that, and that's very visible. And our bigger ram clients, it's a big part of what they do when they decide to put genetics front and center. If I wander down the rows at Bilth, and this isn't an anti-Bilth thing at all, but my first day on the job 20-something years ago, 25 years ago, was putting spray marks on the back of rams at Bilth. And I thought, gosh, if I'm successful in this job, all the rams will have marks on, and that will be an indicator of my success. And there's less information there than ever. So the market is becoming very segregated. My clients that do sell there don't always put the figures up, because people have cherry-picked the best genetics already. They're the ones that are left over at the end of the season that they haven't found a home for. And you've got guys there that are brilliant at feeding and presenting rams. And to actually get involved in a recording scheme that might say your sheep aren't the top of the tree is actually a disadvantage. So yeah, you're seeing some big differences. The ex-Lana folk, the meat link breeders, performing recording is the thing that everybody does. We've got lots of clients that are really pushing it, but industry impact is a challenge.
Yeah, and you can do a lot with a lot of money and feed, can't you, to change what an animal looks like, but that isn't what he's going to pass on to the progeny.
No, but I just get amazed when people still go back into that cycle. Oh, I got a fantastic ram. It was phenomenal. It was great. We were unlucky. We lost it this winter. But anyway, I'm going to go and get another one. You're going to get another. It didn't survive the winter. It did one season. Why keep going back to that place? These rams should be lasting more seasons than that if they've been reared in a sort of fit for purpose manner, shouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Has anybody else got any questions? Crosby, you've normally got a question for me or for our speaker.
Yeah, it's an awkward one. Sam converted me years ago, and I would back up what Sam was saying. I know, working on the traits comparison within the same breed, Sam, there's two rams in particular, two Primeras I got out of Innovis, I think it was, but the Signet shows the muscle and the growth rate and the various bits and pieces. But the one that interested me most was the the growth rate, rams, certainly they finish quicker, but they finish at a lighter weight. The conformation, as in it takes a longer time to get the conformation on, but both rams bled as the traits said they would. So certainly, but the question it's a selfish one, I suppose. We can't get anything out of England now because with the blue tongue restrictions. Comparison to sheep Ireland, have you guys got any further linking it together and something on the same, that we could compare?
The challenge is the money that's required to do a full international conversion comparison relative to the benefit from that because of the trickle of genetics. I mean, we have new Charolais coming into the Charolais analysis, and Norman would say it'd be great if they actually came in with more information. But what we do is we set them up with the fullest pedigree, so inevitably they go back and link to something we know something about. And the advantage now, I guess, is that he can go in and genotype it, and that does give him that starting point and that lift. So they're not, forever with low figures until they're tested and not off they go. So I think I would rather spend the money in other areas than doing the full conversion between the two. At this moment, it is encouraging to see that if we do something on Charolais and we share our results and we say actually growth is growth and your high figured sheep are our high figured sheep. I pulled out a nice Dolby example the other day where I was showing his figures in the different countries. So yeah, I understand the frustration, but it probably isn't the high priority at the moment in terms of spend.
I wish there were more in Northern Ireland that were signet recorded, but certainly I have been buying the Charlies, and what I'm getting back from the signet results are right on the button.
Good. Well, that's a lovely endorsement. Thank you, Crosby. That's very kind.
Were you remiss in Norman? Was that Norman McMurdy you were talking about, or?
Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, Norman. I mean, one of the things that might interest you, Crosby, that will probably change in our terminal sire analysis is trying to get a bit more focus on lamb survival. We're very good at thinking about growth. We love confirmation. That causes everyone's interest in confirmation. I understand why. We probably overvalue it in many ways, but it does get breeders to engage. But lamb survival is also a genetic trait. Probably has that. We've redone the heritability, is probably 12-15% heritable. And if you get an extra 1 or 2% of your lambs to live, then that's worth a tremendous amount.
Yeah, I think John Morrow actually continued that. I've got 2 clins of him last year, very different results. So that'll be interesting to follow as well. Thank you, Sam.
Lovely. Thanks, Crosby.
Thank you. Liz, if you just unmute yourself, Liz.
Oh, it's James, actually.
Oh, James, sorry.
I think Sam probably touched on what I was going to say. I mean, the situation that we're in, having sold all our sheep and then restocked with New Zealand Romneys and just lambing outdoors and with very little intervention, that we require a very different type of sheep. That if we are putting probably half the Romneys are going to terminal sires, but we need a terminal sire that has been bred and reared in a similar sort of way. That we need figures on rams that have actually been bred outside with very little intervention. It's a completely separate thing. All the figures on your recorded terminal sire blocks are probably nearly what I would imagine they're 100% indoor lambing and a lot of intervention.
Yeah, it's surprising that. So yeah, I agree. That's really important. It's important for 2 reasons, isn't it? One is that the ram comes down the trailer, knows what grass looks like, and then heads out to eat it, and isn't constantly looking to see where the bucket's coming from. And then secondly, that actually he's from a series of generations of sheep that have been reared under that environment, exposed to a bit of a worm challenge, exposed to the odd droughty summer, and yet has got a degree of resilience and grown despite that. And lamb survival is also part and parcel of that. You need to let some die to identify lamb survival. So yeah, I would agree. I think what I'm encouraged by is the number of flocks that actually have changed over the last, and it's been happening over the last decade. Suffolk is probably a good example. At one point, everyone was doing January the 1st lambing, or very, very close to it, even slightly in front of it, feeding them like hell to get ram lambs sold, to get them off through an auction, and then lo and behold, you'd sell another one the next year. But that's an expensive business model because the cost of creep and food and concentrates going into them. So we'd always had some people producing shearlings, but the number of people that dropped back to actually lamb in March, to lamb in April, to produce shearlings on forage, but then you can't take them to the sale because they're half the size of everybody else's. And so they actually then have to sell very strongly from farm, but because they're not visible anymore at the likes of Bilth and Kelso. So they're out there. You had Sandy No up at Brotherston. You've got Peter Baby doing his thing, albeit with Suftexes and Suffolks. Matt Harding is probably one of our best examples, up with me in Warwickshire, also producing Aber Blacks. So with one strain with some Charolais in the background, and the other that is pure Suffolk. But again, it's interesting, isn't it? They've often turned to Kiwi to actually get that little bit of vigor in. Yeah. Matt uses a bit of New Zealand. He's keen to get the blend, likes the vigor of New Zealand, these rams with good capacity to sire, to mate with lots of ewes, but maybe the improvements we've made in conformation, he likes those through the UK, so that blend.
Yeah, it's almost like a we almost need a separate scheme for terminal rams that are suited to using on outdoor lambing flocks.
I mean, it's a challenge to find the flocks and build those relationships and to understand what people are genuinely doing on their farm and what that means from a rearing point of view and a health point of view. I'm relatively comfortable that they are analysed together, because at the end of the day, we're interested in growth and muscling, and whether they're grown at 1,000,000 miles an hour or they're just grown more slowly, the animals that are the better, the efficient growers, feed converters, the high growth animals will come out of the top regardless of system.
Yeah, our experience of going around because we bought Romney ewes from probably 4 or 5 different flocks to get our numbers up, that every one of them was breeding all their Romney sheep back to Romneys.
Yep.
And it's kind of not because that was really the best thing to do, but they would all say the same thing: more important to have a live lamb than a lamb that's good conformation. And it does worry me that we've gone into Romneys, and unless we are using, in my ideal world, we would only put enough Romneys back to the Romney to breed our ewe lamb replacements, and then we want a terminal sire, because I do think that selling direct to ABP, as more people, there are a lot of more people keeping large numbers of Romney ewes, and if they're all just breeding back to the Romney, then they will turn around to me and say, oh well, it doesn't really matter if you get quite a few O grades and a few Ps, but having come from the other side of it, where we were getting predominantly U's and E's and U's previously, now we're getting a lot of R's and O's, and in the long term, surely as the numbers of poorer conformation lambs come through, the likes of ABP are just going to penalise them more to try to encourage people to get back to producing better confirmation lambs again, because they're less efficient in the abattoir. It's not what they want, is it?
And the other the other danger, I guess, is if you say, okay, so we want to improve confirmation, so let's put that into our Romney as well. And actually, you don't necessarily want that ewe to become high confirmation, muscular. There's a balance, isn't there? And you don't necessarily want to increase ewe weight either. So yeah, it's a fair comment.
I've heard of a few Romney breeders that have been doing the back fat and muscle depth scanning for quite a long time, and have got some improvement, but whether they've lost some of the maternal traits, I don't know. But
yeah, I think the nice thing through index selection is that you can do both. You can put in as many traits as you like, you just make slower progress in all of them. So yeah, we certainly do have people that are doing muscle and back fat, but they have to keep an eye on prolificacy, and they have to keep an eye on milk, and because they're both in the index, they can both go along at the same time. Sorry, Katie, this turned into a private chat. I better let you get on with sharing.
That's all right. But obviously, if you need any of those contacts, James, just let me know, and I can put either give your details to Sam to send to those breeders. If you wanted to hook up with any of those that he mentioned, just let me know. There's a question in the chat from Terence. Have you identified the gene that causes Texel throat?
I've done 2 webinars today, and that question's come up on both of them. I haven't. Texels tend to run their own genetic evaluation these days, and so their destiny is in their hands. It's interesting, if you actually look at the map file that comes with the genotype, there are 1 or 2 regions that have Texel listed on them around that point. So obviously somebody out there is looking at some important major genes in the background. And I know my friends in Ireland, Sheep Ireland, have talked about it a little bit as well. But as we're not really working with the Texel breed, it hasn't become a high priority for the AHDB research, but I will follow it with great interest. So that's probably one to have a chat with folks at the Texel Society. The next question will be, should you find it, will breeders actually embrace it? Or if it changes the phenotype and the shape of the sheep that they want to win with, will they shrug a shoulder and ignore it? One would hope not. But some of these traits are relatively visible, and it's actually, I would guess, selection for a slightly more compressed neck that hasn't helped in the first place.
Yeah, some of the pedigree breeding traits that people select for within any one of the 100 odd breeds that we've got, some of them are definitely to be desired. I've got another question if there's no others there. You mentioned about the genomic work, Sam, and how does that influence the work that you're doing and the figures that the farmers are actually seeing?
Well, I suppose the nice thing about genomics in this context is that we're not ever going to get masses of abattoir data from some of these ram breeding flocks, but we can actually genotype the animals that are being killed through RamCompare, so we can feed some of that information back through and some of the major influences in the background. So I think that's probably the way that will trickle through. And you do occasionally see some of the major genes having quite a big impact as well. I was looking at the myostatin status of Charolais with either 0, 1 or 2 copies of myostatin, and it just jumps out at you the impact that it has on conformation, which doesn't surprise anyone on this call. We all know about myostatin and the influence of shape, but it does mean that if you're genotyping even a relatively young lamb, knowing the number of copies of that it would carry will help improve our breeding values for conformation.
and this might be a really silly question, but I always say to everyone there is never such thing as a silly question, so I'm going to ask it anyway. I think as RamCompare enabled you to compare different rams from different breeds, because I know previously you had to be looking at the correct index to be looking at the figures when looking to buy them.
Yeah. All of the analyses are run as mixed breed evaluations. So we produce the EBVs and effectively it's a level playing field. But we know the linkage between Suffolks and Charolais, for example, isn't as strong as it is between Suffolks and Suffolks within the breed. So for the time being, we do something called a rebase, which says we take the figures and then we change the base, so we make the base the same for all, and then present the figures from that. There's always a lot of discussion about, can we get rid of that rebase? Just figures are figures. There'll be winners and losers in that. You imagine you've got a breed where the best scan weight is actually -2 and the worst one is -7. It's very hard to get everyone excited about the top 1% ram for growth whose breeding value for scan weight is -2, which means they're still 2 kilos slower than the average terminal sire in a much bigger breed. So we start off hiding behind the genetic reasons that we can't do it, but then we also have some of the sort of the political, logistical reasons why that might be harder. The nice thing for my maternal evaluation with Clin and Easy Care and Exlana in there is that from day one, we didn't rebase. We have so many wool shedders jumping out into other breeds. We have so many Clin and Exlana and Easy Care moving in and out of the other flocks that there was a degree of linkage between them. And so we took the decision to try and be brave and not have that rebasing in the background. And I think maybe we will get there with terminal sires, but maybe one more iteration away. If you ever wanted to do such a comparison, Katie, we actually publish the conversion factors on the website. So there's nothing very hidden. It actually says, well, if you want to change a Suffolk's EBVs onto a Beltex benchmark to do that comparison, then you can do that. And I do that for clients occasionally if they've got Suftex breeding programs.
Yeah, I just thought it was always, or I felt that was one reason why some producers sort of didn't look at the EBVs as much as I would always want them to be looking at them, because they'd maybe be buying a couple of different breeds of rams and it confused them by having to look at different benchmarks and wonder whether that was now not the case. But
yeah, I mean the charts are comparable as such. You know, we present the same data in the same ways, and the messages about, you know, the more ink on that side of the chart, the better the figures, that would still hold true.
Yeah, okay. There's another question from Carl. Do traits change with the age of the ram?
The breeding values will change with every run if there's more information coming in, or information on relatives, or we add more data on great-great-grand progeny. But once they get to a relatively high level of accuracy, then they shouldn't change very much. You know, we're talking decimal points if a ram's got 400 or 500 lambs on the ground. The only reason why they then might change would be if we actually change the model. We said, well, we're going to analyze it in a different way, then that would change the ranking. But certainly for young rams coming in that won't have progeny, you buy the animal, it's way better than buying blind, but you'll typically have accuracy figures with the breeding value in sort of 60s and 70s. And that means that it could change. It could go up or it could go down. At least if you bought a top 10% ram, you know that, you know, it's not suddenly going to go to the bottom of the pile, but there will be a little bit of movement over time.
Okay, thank you. If anyone else has got any other question, oh, Carl, if you want to unmute yourself.
He's thumbs us up. I think he liked that
thumbs
answer.
up, not a hand.
So I'll take that.
Okay, fab. Yeah, if anybody else got any other quick questions, then do unmute yourself or put your hand up before I wrap up. But thank you very much, Sam, for sharing your knowledge about RamCompare. And it's been really insightful to hear how the project, whichever one it is, has gone over over the past, was it 10 years it's been going now, did you say?
Yeah, and
15.
And I know you're trying to wrap up. There is something I should probably say, which is the nice thing that this year we've got 3 new farms that are all part of ABP Group that have joined us this year. So I can see, I think Melissa's on the call, and you know, we've got 2 more farms across in Staffordshire and Herefordshire as well. So maybe there'll be a joint activity we can do, Katie, whereby we have an open day on one of these farms and people can come and pull some wellies on and see what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. We'll definitely sort that out, Sam. That sounds great. And I guess we could probably visit all of the farms as long as they're willing, one over the next few years, so that we can get around them all and see the progress of what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, I think I've only talked them into it for 12 months yet. That was the unkept secret in the background to talk about where we go next. But yeah, they've got, the good thing is the rams I provided last autumn got the ewes in lamb, because that's a difficult conversation if that doesn't happen. And now we've got lambs being born now. So maybe it'll all depend on what they think to the lambs as to how keen they are for the future. But yeah, it all bodes well.
Especially asking people to single sire mate. I guess that's always a challenging one to start with, because I guess it's a slightly risky, even though they've had their ram MOTs by the vets, etc. It's still a bit of a.
You do everything you can to reduce risk, but that is, and these are big units, so you know they want tight lambing patterns and all those things that you have on a good efficient sheep farm. But yeah, we've been all right this year anyway.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to end it by saying and I know it wasn't everywhere, because I did speak to someone from Northern Ireland today and they said they had rain again today, but I was loving the sunshine today. It made me feel so much better, and I feel like spring is just around the corner. So fingers crossed it is there for everybody, and it'll help everyone's spirits, and things will start to dry up a little bit. But thanks again, Sam, for sharing your knowledge. And next week we've got a webinar on water. So if you haven't already let me know that you want to join that, then let me know, and hopefully see you next week all about water. Thank you very much, everyone.
Super.
See you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam. Bye-bye.
Bye.